You know what time it is? Time for Monday Morning Pastor. This is Monday Morning Pastor, Scott. If you listen or if you watch Monday Morning Pastor, that makes you one of like 8 people, I think, who does. So thank you for choosing to be on today. Introduce yourself to our 7 other watchers.
Our 7, well, maybe we'll get to 10 after today.
There you go.
My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor down in the southwest portion of Iowa, not too far away from Johnny, just a couple of hours, in a small town called Underwood, at a church called Underwood Lutheran. We've got a wonderfully original name that I love very much. But I've been I'd like to say a long-time watcher of Monday Morning Pastor, but since it's only been going on for about a month, I guess it's not really too long-term.
As long as anybody, yeah.
Yes, as long as anybody, and been kind of following 200 churches now for, I don't know, 6 months or so,
Awesome.
and a dubbed by Johnny himself friend of the show.
There you go, friend of the show, Scott Dalen. Well, Scott, it's awesome to have you on today. We're trying new tricks, like I'm full screen right now, which is a weird new trick that we're trying, but we're going to see what happens. You emailed me some ideas of what to talk about. You had a lot. Scott, you're a man who has a multiplicity of ideas, which I like. But one in particular stood out to me. You said ministry is the interruptions.
Yeah, absolutely. The ministry being in interruptions is some advice that I got from a mentor pastor of mine a number of years ago, quite a bit before I even entered ministry or thought about seminary, that so much of ministry is being in relationship with the people that we are called to minister to. The flock that we're given, or
Sure.
whatever you want to call it, and in many ways that mirrors the example that Jesus gave us, that he was in relationship with his disciples, namely, but also with everyone that he encountered, and we see throughout Scripture many examples of when an interruption would happen and Jesus would just kind of run with it. In fact, The gospel lesson that I preached on just a week or so ago was the story of Jesus heading off to heal Jairus' daughter, and then he's interrupted by the woman who touches his cloak.
Right.
And right in the midst of it, it's probably what put it in my head when you and I were talking last week. That, I think, leads to the first point that we mentioned, that we need to recognize that in ministry, interruptions are going to happen.
Yes.
Regardless of what our regular weekly schedule looks like, and everybody's schedule is a little bit different, or everybody's approach to what needs to happen week to week is a little bit different.
Right.
Those things are gonna happen. People are gonna come into the office, or when we're out in the community, we're gonna bump into people, and that doesn't really matter if you're in a large community and a large congregation,
right,
or if you're small congregation and a small community. Prior to coming to Underwood, I was up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Okay.
My wife worked at a church of about 1,500 people in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, so large metro, millions of people around.
Yeah.
And I also did my internship year during seminary in the Twin Cities, and always thought, well, I can still be anonymous. Even though, I wear the pastor hat, I'm anonymous, and there's so many people around that they'll never find me if I'm not at church. It's going to happen regardless of what we have going on. I think that kind of then lends itself to the second point that I have is that we just need to be available to our people, whether that's being in the office. One thing I've established is my door's always open. If I'm here, my door is open, unless I'm in with an individual, kind of talking with them. And people know that they can come in and step around into my office and engage, and that's okay. And that's just something that I established very early on, and people know that. So, but in addition,
yourself available, right?
Right. Make yourself available. And in addition, I'm not always in the office. Sometimes I get bored because squirrel, I'm off wherever, but to let people know where you are, and social media lets us do that very easily. I'll often post, "Hey, I'm having office hours down the road at Starbucks, so come find me there if you want to talk to me or whatever." So things like that are good too, just so that people know where you are, that they know that they can come to you.
I like that.
And it's just being open to those interruptions when they happen, regardless of what you have going on. One of the big things for me, preaching every week, being a solo pastor, I've got a lot of sermon prep going on. That's one of my regular routines.
Sure.
And yet, those interruptions that happen help me to realize what's going on in the lives of the people and lends itself to that preaching, and to be able to address them, and maybe directly, maybe indirectly, but just recognize what's happening. And people will discover pretty quickly if you're open to those interactions or if you're paying lip service. People can see through the veil pretty quick, I've found. In the midst of all that, there's always a flip side too, and that kind of brings me to my third and final point about being open to the interruptions. We also, as pastors, or not just pastors, but people in ministry in general, need to also recognize that we need to set our own boundaries, and then adhere to them, because people will come and find us. They will. And I learned that pretty quickly when I started at Underwood, and I'm right at my 2-year mark of having started now, that people didn't quite get the whole day off thing. So I would get calls, I would get messages. Occasionally I would get people knocking on the door at the parsonage, which is of course right across the parking lot, so not far away. And I discovered the real need to be intentional about protecting that little bit of Sabbath for myself. And not to say that I'm not available to the people, and I don't care what's going on, and if there's an emergency, absolutely, I'll jump all over it. But to just allow the people to know, and we kind of have to train the people to let them know that, hey, this can wait till tomorrow. I can address this tomorrow, and people kind of figured that out pretty quickly. And yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of doing ministry in the midst of being interrupted and recognizing that those interruptions are the ministry that's happening.
I love it, and it's to me it's like a small church. That is like a small church thing. One of the deals is when you want to have a bigger church, you have to protect your time differently, and you have to close off your office. The open door policy, you can't do that anymore. So it's super applicable for small churches, Scott. And I love the advice. I love the thoughts, and still having your own Sabbath, right, is so important too. So Scott, thanks so much for the thoughts today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Johnny.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Take it easy.
Pastor.